So we'll start with the offense and the projections. And look, obviously, quarterback, there's no change there, right? Camario is your guy. I think it's going to continue to be A.J. Swan and Jaden Rashada battling for that backup role. And then I would imagine both those guys have a role as backups for State, but because of the different skill sets they provide. But ultimately, Camario is your guy. You know that's who you are going to be leaning on at the position. And hopefully you don't have to see anybody but him over the course of the year. And it was a good spring for Camario. Obviously, was able to be fully healthy in time for spring practices. It sounds like he has taken steps forward and continued to grow as a player during this time and continue to get more and more in tune with the players that are going to be around him in this offense. Still has areas to grow for sure, but so much excitement around what State's got at the quarterback spot. Running back is where we sort of have a shakeup, and it's not at starter. Fluff Bothwell is going to be your guy there, and you're confident in that. But when I did this before, at backup I had Xavier Gayden, and then the depth chart piece I had Colin Wilson and J.J. Hill. Coming out of the spring, I'm putting Colin Wilson and J.J. Hill as your backups with Xavier Gayden and Cooper Crosby as your depth guys. So we'll start with Colin Wilson has been one of the guys that was talked up big time throughout the spring. It sounds like he had a really, really nice performance over the past few weeks and was really impressive with the coaching staff, just the explosive and playmaking ability he had, the ability to go and make something happen when the picture around him was not always clear, which I think is always going to be a skill set you look for. That sounds like a guy who's going to play a lot for State. And I think sounded like he kind of jumped Xavier Gayden. Now, to be fair to Gayden, I know he was banged up some, didn't play in the spring scrimmage. So I don't want to completely hold it against him. But, say you got Wally pipped here. But, we go back to last year, Gayden got opportunities to prove himself. And there was a lot of excitement around what Xavier Gayden was going to be within this offense. And you still saw a few of those flashes. But when you kind of saw him get in a more normal role and just take more typical carries, didn't really take advantage of the way you would have liked to have seen him to. So kind of opened the door for these guys in the spring to make a move, and Colin Wilson seems to have made the biggest move. J.J. Hill, everyone coming out of the spring scrimmage is saying that kid is playing right away. And I think a lot of people expected that based on what he was coming out of Tupelo. But by all accounts, he looks the part, looks fully ready to go, and I think he's going to be a part of that rotation. Cooper Crosby I have listed here because he's another guy that sounds like played well throughout the spring and another guy that many have said is going to be college ready. But I do wonder slightly, are you going to have 5 running backs on this roster that you play? Odds are you're not going to. So I would see this as a situation where Cooper Crosby's probably who takes a red shirt year. Now, look, there is another world, and I don't want to project this on the guy, but if we're talking about Xavier Gayden being jumped a little bit on the depth chart, if you go back to last year, because Xavier is not taking a red shirt because he played as a true freshman and obviously played last year as well. So remember last year, Johnny Daniels was coming off a productive year in 2024, and we were going into this coming season like, all right, you brought in Fluff Bothwell, you have Devon Booth back, Xavier Gayden showed all these flashes. Like Johnny Daniels, are you going to be going 4 wide at running back and have those reps split amongst 4 players? And it kind of sounded like some of the reports coming out of fall camp, and this going into past season, that Gayden had jumped Johnny Daniels. And Johnny Daniels played 2 games for State and then ultimately took a red shirt, was done for the year, and now he's in the portal and I believe landed at Tulane. And Daniels is a good player. Could you see Gayden decide to take a red shirt? And I don't want to put that on him. Like, again, I think he's a guy who's got good talent, a guy that could definitely make an impact. I think if you use him properly. And also, he's a young player, too. He could improve on some of the things, the vision, the fumbling, things that he had some issues with. He could get better at, for sure, and be an impact. But just going off what we've heard in the spring, it kind of sounds like he's getting jumped. And I do wonder, do you see a guy choose that he's going to take a seat, sit out this year and make a move? Trey Clark with an interesting point and a fair one. Pass pro for young backs scares me. Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And it is an interesting deal. If you got a pretty young room outside of Fluff and technically Gayden, but I know pass protection was one of the things that talks about with Gayden as well. How has that come along for him? That'll be a big conversation for sure. do you have that handled with the other guys there? But, some guys who are talented enough, it's going to be hard to keep them off the field, I have to think. Moving to wide receiver. So this is one where it's interesting because I've sort of settled in on starters at the outside, but not quite. We did this previously, I had Marquise Johnson, the transfer from Missouri, as one starter. And then I had Aiden Williams and some Frisco McGee sort of as oars. Like one of those two guys is going to start in an outside spot. Interestingly, so Aiden Williams was banged up in the spring. We didn't see him in the spring scrimmage. We got a quote from Levy saying that Frisco and Marquise Johnson were actually battling for the same spot. So the way Levy does his receivers, it's a little air raid-esque, not quite in that air raid. If you're an X, you are only ever playing X and you're never going anywhere else. If you're a Y, you are only playing the Y, never going anywhere else. Technically, Leach had a couple exceptions to that rule, but I won't get into that. No one ever moved around from where you were going to be. Levy's not that stingent or whatever. We would see Brennan Thompson occasionally get in the slot. We would see Anthony Evans occasionally get outside. Kevin Coleman occasionally would play outside. But what Levy does typically do is he has his left and right receivers specifically. It's a tempo thing. We have our guy who's the outside on the left, a guy who's our outside on the right. And we keep him there because when we're trying to play as fast as we are, we want to keep our guys on the side of the field that they're at. And they don't run a lot of crossing routes where you're moving from one side of the field to the next. So it's a lot easier to just say, like, this guy is always going to be outside on the right. This guy is always going to be outside on the left. And we can play fast because of that. Aiden Williams had been an outside left player, which Levy numbers it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 working left to right. So the 1 is the outside left. The 4 is the outside right. Levy had Aiden Williams at the 1. Last year, Brennan Thompson was a 4. Frisco McGee was a 4. Sounds like Frisco's playing that spot again. Levy seems to say that Marquise Johnson is playing at the 4. I have no idea where Aiden Williams is at. I'm assuming he's probably staying at the 1. I am going to continue from now projecting Marquise Johnson as a starter. I do think Levy might tweak this. We did see, I go back to Levy's first year, in the spring, Mario Craver was playing in the slot. As the season came, once the season arrived, Mario Craver was playing outside. So Levy will move guys around, and he will occasionally have the outside receivers flip sides. I remember there were times, like, again, going back to that first year, Mario Craver and Kelly Akari were both outside right receivers. There were a couple times he got both of them on the field at the same time on opposite sides. So he'll do it. And I think ultimately he's going to settle on whoever my 2 best outside receivers are going to get on the field. I think Marquise Johnson, to me, is just too high profile of a transfer to not expect him to take one of those spots. But it sounds like Frisco has continued to earn his way. He was a starter in the spring game, and I think he's going to start at that outside right spot, the 4 spot. And I think Aiden Williams is probably going to be a backup. Now, Grayson Harris is an interesting one here because Grayson Harris, I think a lot of us were projecting him in the slot. He was playing outside in the spring, and sounds like he was, one, really impressive in that spring scrimmage, but as a whole throughout the spring has played well. In the spring scrimmage, Grayson Harris and Frisco McGee were your 2 starters outside. And because of that, I can't be surprised if that's going to be the case once we get to the fall. Really interested to see how this grows over time. But it sounds like you've got some really good options there. We know Anthony Evans is starting in the slot. I think Sion Ragens was working as the backup slot receiver. Sounds like he's also shown a lot to that he's going to be able to get on the field. State's got 6 receivers that you feel pretty good about playing this year. And that's before getting in. We talked about a lot about this freshman class of receivers coming in. Jaden Creation, Zion Crumpton, Henderson, who was here through the spring. So much excitement around that group as guys who could make an impact early on. Maybe one of them does, but I'm kind of leaning towards you probably see a lot of those guys redshirt. But coming out of the spring with what we've heard from this receiver group, I think the guys you see right now are the guys who are going to be taking the field. And Levy doesn't rotate receivers that much. Really the past couple of years, it's been like 4 guys have played. And, I could see it go to like 5 or 6 this year. He doesn't really go beyond that. So I don't think there's going to be much of a role for those younger receivers just based on what we've learned out of the spring. That was another thing. When I had this depth chart up previously, I had like a question mark for like a freshman receiver. Just I didn't know who it would be. And I guess the same could have applied to the slot. I don't think we're really going to see any of those guys unless one of them really stands out come fall camp and wins a battle. I think this is the group you're rolling with. And I think it's a group you can have a lot of success with. Tight end is another one that's gotten interesting. Sam West, we knew was going to be the starter. And when I did this previously, Riley Williams, transfer out of Oregon State, was here. I had Zayon Cotton just because it's like, hey, man, he's too talented and too much of a prototype for what Levy typically looks at tight end for me to not think he could make an impact as a freshman, especially, it sounds like he's looked the part throughout the spring. The name that's been surprising, though, is Joseph Skipworth, the redshirt freshman. And, I think I've already put the hand up on this, but I'll do a hand up again. When I did my breakdown of the tight end room, I didn't talk about Skipworth at all. I talked a lot about one of the other freshmen coming in why am I blanking on his name right now? But a kid who I've since found out is not even going to play this season. Was it Adam Land, I think was his name, because of an injury. He's going to be out. But I kind of looked at Skipworth and, looked at his frame, looked at his weight, and just didn't remember much about him from a recruiting standpoint. And with the other guys coming in, I was like, I'm assuming he's not going to have much of a role. Well, John Cooper, the tight ends coach, has talked a lot about him. Levy's talked about him. And it sounds like he was the number 2 tight end really in the spring behind Sam West. Now, according to what we've heard from the scrimmage, Riley Williams and Cotton both played a lot. Both look like guys that are going to have an impact, which is why I have all these guys listed here. But Joseph Skipworth, sounds like he's going to have an impact to this roster and going to be a part of the rotation in the tight end room. So, hey, good on him. And we'll see what that role looks like. But Sam West, by the way, and not just move past the starter, sounds like West had a very good spring. And they feel really good about what he can be for Mississippi State. So, good to hear that and his potential within this offense. Let's talk about the offensive line group, and let's see if I can get them all on the page. Yeah, just barely make it work. Few changes. So where we have not changed is DJ Chester at left guard, Cannon Boone at starting center. That is the same. All other 3 spots are different from what we had it back in the spring. At left tackle, we have Miles McVay, the transfer out of North Carolina. Right guard, we have the redshirt freshman, LJ Perdome, as the starter. And then right tackle, JUCO, Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins, after a redshirt year last season, starting at right tackle. This is the group that started in the spring game. And I think this is the group that right now you would project as your starting 5 offensive linemen. I don't think this was an injury-based thing in the spring. It sounds like these are the 5 who went out and were the most impressive. We knew Chester and Boone were going to have 2 of those spots down. We had heard a lot of hype around Perdome, but it was one of those deals of like, all right, are you going to really start him as a redshirt freshman, though? Miles McVay kind of sounded like he could play at either tackle spot, but if you remember back when we first did this, we thought Brandon Snee was coming in to be your left tackle. You still had Blake Steen, who you knew was an option to play at either tackle or guard, and you expected from an experience standpoint to be one of your starters. But we talked a lot about this coming out of the spring game. One of the big stories is that Steen was a backup at guard. And it sounds like he's still running number 2 at right tackle right now behind Shumpert-Perkins. And look, Steen working back from injury, and it was not necessarily full go throughout all of the spring. It's possible that once we get into the fall, he's able to kind of take back over one of those starting jobs. But as of right now, it sounds like LJ Perdome, they're more excited about at guard. They love what they've seen from Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins. I think he's probably the breakout guy of spring camp, just based on what we've heard from Levy. And they've talked about Perkins being a guy that could play at left tackle. Well, why are you not playing him at left tackle? It sounds like they like what they have with Miles McVay. So I've talked a lot about this offensive line. I feel better about it coming out of the spring. And I think these are your guys. Now, the way I've got the backups listed is kind of a mix between players that I would expect to see on the field versus how I actually think the true rotation would be. I think Saquon Miles is going to get reps from Mississippi State at either tackle spot. But if you ask me who the backup left tackle is, I think if McVay went down, I think they're putting Jakeem Shumpert-Perkins there. And if that happens, Blake Steen is stepping in at right tackle. I think Isaiah Dent was running second team in the spring, but I think Blake Steen would be your number 2 there. I think Blake Steen is probably your number 2 at both of these guard spots behind DJ Chester and LJ Perdome. But TJ Lockhart could be a guy who steps in as well. Mario Nash was the number 2 center in the spring. I would expect if Cannon Boone goes down, DJ Chester is going to step in at center for Mississippi State. That'd be my expectation. So, I think I have 7 players in total up here, and Lebby is kind of talking about having 7 that he feels pretty good about. They're obviously still after trying to find another depth piece. As the kid from Mercer that they're interested in, who's more of a guard type who could step in and be a depth piece who could feasibly play. But I think this is the group of offensive linemen you're primarily looking at. Overall, it's an offense that I feel pretty good about, man. I love the skill talent. Obviously, Camario, the ceiling is unlimited just about because of his skill set. And if this offensive line truly has taken a nice step forward and can continue to grow, you got a chance to have an offense that could be really exciting this year.